Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to Stately Von Manor, where Roger and I have returned. We've returned, and we're going to talk about a book I just finished reading, and that is this book. This is The Body Snatchers. You might be more familiar with it under the title Invasion of the Body Snatchers by Jack Finney. And this is a great book. I mean, it would be a really great book except for a couple things. You know, when you're on Goodreads, when you have to, you know, go on Goodreads, you have to give it a star rating. And I gave this 4 stars. It would have been 5 if it wasn't for a couple of things, which I'll talk about. But really, really good book. Made into, I think, 4 different movies. I think they made 4 films off of this. There was the 1956 version, which is my favorite, and it's the closest to the book by far. Then there's the 1978 version, which is really, really good. Then there was a version that came out, I don't know, was it the 90s? I don't remember, but I don't remember anything about that movie, so maybe it wasn't so great. And then there was the 2007 movie Invasion, which just sucked, and that's why I remember it. But they all came from this book, and you are probably familiar with this story a little bit, even if you've never read the book or seen the films. This is where the term pod people came from this book. And it's fantastic about an insidious invasion, an insidious alien invasion, which takes place in Santa Mira, California, which is in Marin County, so it's just north of the manor up that way. The pod people haven't reached us so far, have they? I hope not. But, so Santa Mira, California, small town. And in this town is our hero, Miles, who's a doctor in Santa Mira, as his father was before him. And he's a young doctor, he's in his 20s. And the story is really, aside from being about an insidious alien invasion, it's about Miles and Becky, who he went to high school with. He dated her briefly, but they both, ended up marrying other people, and they both ended up divorced. And Miles carries around the pain of that divorce at this point in the book. And he covers up his pain through humor. And so he tends to joke around a lot and crack jokes, even when it's frankly inappropriate. Like if it's a really serious situation, he'll come in joking, because that's just the way he's learned to deal with things, is through humor. And he's alone and lonely, you can tell, but he's afraid to get into another relationship. And when he runs into Becky again during the course of this story, Becky comes to see him in his doctor's office. Immediately, he's very attracted to her. And he feels like this is a person I can hang out with. She's been through a divorce. She's been through the same things that I have. And there's no reason to get serious with her. And no one will expect me to get serious with her, I'm not sure why, but he feels this way. But Becky's coming to him because her cousin claims that her uncle is not her uncle. And she's really worried. And so Miles says, okay, let's go see your cousin. So they do. And she is convinced that her uncle is not her uncle. He looks just like her uncle, talks just like her uncle. Everything about him really is just like her uncle. But it's not her uncle. She's convinced. There's something about him that is emotionally cold or emotionally distant. She just feels that it isn't him. Of course, he thinks she's crazy or has some sort of problem, but it's out of his depth. He's just a general practitioner, and she needs to go, he thinks, to a psychiatrist. And that's all he says, hey, go see my friend, the psychiatrist. That's all he can do for her. And he kind of forgets it after that. But very soon, there are a bunch of other people that come to see him with the same kind of claims. You know, a kid who thinks his mom is not his mom, a woman who thinks her husband's not her husband, that kind of thing. It keeps happening. And they're all right because this is an alien invasion. And some alien pods have drifted down from outer space. And these pods, when you're sleeping, they can transform into you, into a version of you. They're like a parasite. They're parasites from outer space. And they slowly start to take over this small town. And it's great. It's just this great story of paranoia that Miles and Becky have to deal with. And they hook up with a couple friends who find a body in their basement, which is slowly transforming into the friend whose name, for some reason, I can't remember, and it's not important at the moment. And that's how they really figure out, hey, something's going on, and they figure out that ties into these claims of people that people are making. And it's great. It's really insidious alien invasion, and how they have to figure out how to deal with it. And of course, they have to stay awake the whole time. Otherwise, they'll turn into pod people. And I won't spoil the story any more than I already did, but it's great. It's just a great exercise in paranoia with a really, at the time, unique alien invasion. And it's frankly scary. It has some genuinely scary moments. And the 1956 film, starring Kevin McCarthy, I think, played Miles, is fantastic. And it sticks very close to this book. But there were some changes made. And there were some pretty good changes because there are a couple weaknesses in this book. It's pretty strong throughout. Very well written, very straightforward. Very straightforward story. But the science in this book is... Now, this is a science fiction story, but the science is shaky, to say the least. And so there are some... And it would have been better, I think, if Finney had left some things just mysterious, He didn't have to explain how the pods worked or how the pods really got to Earth even. And he explains those things, and he really doesn't need to. There is a scene in here where a guy who has been taken over by the aliens, he's a pod person, kind of explains everything to Miles. And you didn't really have to do that. Because the scientific explanations in this are just not, they just don't hold up. They just don't work. Whereas in the film version, they're very light on that. They don't go into great detail as far how everything works. And that works better for the story. And the other thing is the ending of this book. It's going great right up into the last few pages. And then boom, it's over and everything's all right. I won't tell you how it resolves, but it's kind of ridiculous. And the filmmakers of at least the first two movies, I can't remember the other two that well, realized that. And they both the films had very different endings. The one from 56 actually had a couple different endings. They had one ending that they filmed, that they kept in the movie, that was judged too dark, I guess. And then they kind of gave the whole film they gave it a different beginning and a different ending. And it was still better than this. It was an ending that gave you hope that the humans can defeat the aliens, whereas the first version was just, we're screwed. And in the 1978 version had a very, very unexpected and dark ending, which I won't spoil because it was great. But this book, no. This book, frankly, has kind of... It's not exactly a happy ending, but yeah, the aliens, they're gone. it's fine. Everything's fine now. As far as the invasion goes, there is still the lingering results from the invasion. And so it's not like an uplifting happy ending or whatever, but it's not great. It's really abrupt and frankly kind of silly. I won't tell you what happens, but yeah, it's abrupt and silly. Which is unfortunate, that you have a book this good and it can't stick the landing. Whereas if you see the film changes a couple of things. And if you see the film after you read this, the changes are actually extra good because you don't expect them. And one change is great, even before the ending, that if you read this book would be completely unexpected. So this is one of the instances where the films do improve on the book in certain ways. The film in '56, like I said, sticks close to this book, so you still have that small town feel, which gives you a very 1950s feeling where everything's fine. It's the 50s. Everything's great. Everything's fine. But no, underneath, behind the facade, things are not great, which is the 1950s. It looks all bright and happy, but no, it's not. It's really not. And that's why this book feels so much like the 1950s. It was revised by Finney a little bit when the 1970s film came out. Basically, he just changed the dates and a couple little things. But from what I understand, it still reads very much like a 1950s book. The 1970s film, it departed from the small town feel that you have in this book and went to the city. And so it has a very urban, a feel of very urban decay and that kind of things, and which is very 1970s. So it feels like a 1970s film with 1970s concerns, and it's excellent. I do prefer the 50s version of it. I like that the alien invasion of the small town, and just that feeling of everything looks great, everything seems fine, but it's really, really not. Things are really not fine. It's an excellent book. I highly recommend it. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.